We have reached the end of the text titled Sri Aurobindo Upanishad, where Sri Aurobindo articulates his own approach to life and the world in 19 verses in the Upanishadic style. In these last verses, we had a very practical formulation of the human problem and its resolution. The initial verses began with a vast vision of the cosmos as the Brahman manifesting in all his multiplicity, aspects, powers, and the whole world was presented as his manifestation, as himself, as real in manifestation as he is in his origin. The world also is real, the real light of his reality. But the manifestation we saw was an expression of his bliss. Verse 10, whatever thus manifests is the world bliss only. And the rest of the Upanishad dwells on this principle of bliss underlying the whole manifestation. Sri Aurobindo observes that nothing in the cosmos could exist or could survive without this constant support of the bliss. Unless that bliss is present, nothing can survive the impact or the conflict and the pressure of circumstances. Even the most inanimate object is supported by that divine bliss. And yet, the divine chooses to enjoy that bliss also in its concealed aspect. And therefore, the divine enters as the Jiva in a disguise, and he experiences the bliss of the cosmos, his own bliss, including the concealment of his bliss, which is also an aspect of his blissful play. To deny oneself the experience of revealed bliss is also a part of his play, and he chooses to enjoy that dark ananda as if. So, the Jiva enjoys blissfully all world experience, but in order for him to enjoy fully this negative aspect or negation of bliss as if in appearance, he allows this screen of ignorance to come in between, and there is the frontal experience of the surface ego which does not experience the bliss. Behind, the Jiva blissfully laughs, blissfully cries and sheds tears, but always in bliss. We saw how the ego goes through its various struggles. It recognizes itself as finite, limited, incapable, weak, and therefore sorrowful. He struggles to act, to know, to achieve with labor, expending energy, struggling in mortality. And the whole cycle which we studied goes through 3 stages: a tamasic response, a rajasic response, and then a more sattvic, enlightened response. But having come to the sattvic stage, he also realizes in his ego ignorance, I am not so sattvic and happy that I can make you happy by my own suffering. And so he withholds, limits himself, and that is the new status of tamas, out of which another cycle of rajas and sattva emerges, and so on. This is the form of ignorance in mind. That was verse 15. Verse 16 we saw that the seed is in the ego. By deliverance from ego, that is from sense of separateness, one is delivered from ignorance. By deliverance from ignorance, one is delivered from suffering, and one recovers the blissfulness of the Jiva. And there, several degrees of the recovery are described. Knowing that I am all blissful, he am I. I am one, I am infinite, I am all. One becomes all blissful one becomes a being of bliss. This alone is liberation, and we dwelt on this, that liberation is not an exclusive withdrawal into silence, because that also is a denial and a partial realization of God. True liberation is to know Him in His totality, in His transcendence, in His silence, in His action, and in His manifestation as the bliss and the bliss world that He has become. So this alone is liberation, and therefore in this liberation, the liberated one enjoys the enjoyments of all. Enjoying all joys infinitely, he is joined with finites. Enjoying finites, he is not reduced from infinity. He becomes one, he becomes many, because he is free. He can become one, he can become many, he is always free of both. But in the earlier portion, where he discusses the infinities and the finites, although we dwelt on it last time, there is one important facet which needs elaboration. There is an idea here that he enjoys the enjoyments of all, but also that he enjoys all the enjoyments of all, and he enjoys all joys infinitely while he is still joined with the finites. So there is two ideas here. There is the infinity of the enjoyment, that all beings enjoy are his enjoyments. The struggle of the worm to survive is also enjoyed by the jiva presiding behind. That enjoyment is also his enjoyment. The whirl of the planets in space is also his enjoyment. When a supernova explodes in a burst of violent energy, that also is his enjoyment. When the flower blooms and tenderly releases its perfume, that also is his enjoyment, as the bee which enjoys the perfume of the flower is his enjoyment. So the infinity here includes all the enjoyments of the whole movement of the cosmos as a bursting out of bliss. But also there is the suggestion that in each joy, his enjoyment is complete and infinite. When we breathe the perfume of the flower, for us that is one limited, finite experience. But for this liberated being, in that perfume of the flower, he experiences the infinity of bliss. Because for him, the perfume is one facet of the one who is all. The flower is one facet of the one who is all. And therefore, in the perfume of the flower that he breathes, he experiences the wholeness of the divine, and the enjoyment itself is infinite. But the infinity is not an overwhelming infinity. There is this aspect of the finite. So he says he is still joined with the finite. He experiences the finiteness of the appearance of the perfume of the flower and the finiteness of the form of the flower, while still enjoying the infinity behind that finite appearance. And this is important because this is in contrast with experiences of higher domains of the spirit, where the finiteness becomes as if subdued. It is all infinite and multiplicity of infinities. It is only in the material world, where form and finiteness of form predominate, that we can have this unique experience, that although we experience finiteness of things, we enjoy them infinitely, and the enjoyment is infinite. And this is a unique character of the material world. So this he enjoys in the liberation. He becomes one, he becomes many. Although unborn, he is still as if born. Even being born, he is not bound. We dwelt on this last time. He has no birth. And then the verse which today we will take up for elaboration. I, the self, reveal self by self in self. Liberated by this knowledge, one enjoys the play. This we touched upon, but the idea here is that in his liberation, all is self, all is himself. So everything that takes place is taking place in himself only. There is no other. And therefore, first, there is a tremendous security. When all is yourself, you may pretend to enter in conflict with yourself as much as you want. But you know it is a pretense, and at any point, when the conflict becomes too much, or it is as if overwhelming your overall purpose of the play, you can choose to change the balance because it is yourself, always. Even if you allow yourself to be overwhelmed and completely extinguished by the other is only yourself. So nothing is ever lost. It is as if the small wave allows itself to be absorbed by the large wave, and it may seem to the small wave that is as if it is lost, but to the ocean, it has only changed the balance of its rhythm and absorbed one part of itself into another part. It is always ocean. So when all is in self, then there is this tremendous security. Nothing can ever be lost. Nothing is ever extinguished. I am forever. And you can experience the most intense, the most apparently destructive movements, but they are all part of the play and in utter security. The second thing is, in the self, what is manifested is self. So the whole movement of manifestation is fulfilling you. I am fulfilled in this cosmic world bliss. It is I that goes out to manifest. By what? What is the means of manifestation? Who makes the effort? What is the nature of that means by which I become other than I? By self, by my own power. And therefore, there is nothing to oppose, and there is this perfect smoothness, effortlessness of the action. Because I that am, become, and there is no other. So the whole movement is a streaming, laminar, effortless outflow of self. And the movement is a radiation. So in self, the self, by self, am radiating self. So the whole movement as it moves out is still self. And it is myself appearing in so many forms, in multiplicity of movement. By this knowledge, liberated, he plays. And so the whole nature of the play is, I chose, effortlessly expressing myself, and all that is revealed is my own infinite potential that is drawn out. Sri Aurobindo uses the analogy of the storyteller or the playwright who looks into himself and says, what will I narrate? And there is infinite possibility, I can narrate anything. And then out of that he casts out, in thought form, a certain set of possibilities, builds his characters. But in his consciousness, they are all simultaneous. They are not yet bound in time. And then a third step takes place where he sequences them in time. This is the sequence in which the events unfold. And the fourth step, it is articulated now in words. In the words, he may follow a jump sequence, there may be flashbacks and so on, but it is now frozen when it takes on the form of words. These represent the four statuses of Brahman. The first status, infinite potential, but not articulated. All is there. The second status, certain possibilities are drawn out and held without binding in time. All those possibilities are held and known, formulated. A third step, where they are sequenced in time and space and arranged perfectly. But still there is a fluidity of their relationships. And there is a lot which is not said. All the secret stories which have gone behind the scenes, by which the characters have become what they are, because of which their motivations are thus and not otherwise. All those are still left unspoken, but they are known. And in the fourth step, a limited part of it is articulated and revealed in the objectified material expression of Brahman. This whole movement of Brahman revealing himself is presided over by his blissfulness for the purpose of the play. So in this large, comprehensive, all-inclusive experience, the play is complete, all-inclusive, but also from a consciousness of liberation. He is utterly free in his play. And verse 18 now, which is what we will dwell on, emphasizes this in its very first statement. For Leela, for the play. For Leela indeed is the world. The world had no other purpose except to manifest this play. Leelartham hi jagad ananda. Not only that for the Leela, for the play, is this world manifested, but Jagad Anandartham Leelamaya iti Leelam Kuruta. For the world bliss to be played out, the Leelamaya, the one blissful, the one playful, iti Leelam Kuruta, thus manifested his play. So, he becomes playful, he expresses his playfulness in order to manifest his bliss. And therefore we, who are himself now, who have entered the play, what is our role in it? And he says, Anandasya putra, children of the bliss, yukta, united, Kridatanandam bhungdvam. Play on in the bliss, enjoying the bliss. So the purpose for us, as himself projected, now having recovered our freedom, having got free from the ego, having got free from the ignorance, having recovered the poise of the jiva and the freedom of the jiva, what is our role? To participate in this play. And therefore it is an exhortation. He says, enjoy the play, play in the bliss. This point is extremely important, and it is lost in the conventional Vedantic teaching as it survives today. The goal of the Vedantic teaching of today is to withdraw into liberation, to get free from the suffering of the world. Whereas Sri Aurobindo says, if the whole point was to get out of it, why did we get in? We got in because the first step was to enjoy this dark ananda, as if the appearance of non-bliss. Although the non-bliss is made up of the bliss only, by the play of the bliss. To enjoy that and to grow out of it and to awaken from it is also a play and an experience of the bliss for the jiva concealed. Having discovered ourselves, having revealed the divine, having recovered our true freedom, the movement of the play continues and the participation in the bliss continues. But now we are as if consciously the divine himself in individualized form, participating and playing with this family, multiplicity of so many forms of the same one divine, playing out amongst ourselves. And it is this which is emphasized in the tantric teaching, that we are meant to be participants in the divine play, in his blissful play. In the Veda, though, this distinction had not taken place. The purpose of our existence is the conscious participation in the divine bliss. And so Sri Aurobindo brings this back in the translation. Therefore be engaged in Leela, O sons of bliss. Being united, play, enjoy the bliss. But how are we to enjoy the bliss? What is the prerequisite? And here he puts it in these terms, in 2 steps. Ekam bhogyam bhagavantam prapya bhungdhvam sarvavastushu. In the translation, having attained the one enjoyable divine, enjoy him in all things. The Sanskrit has some very important suggestions. Ekam bhogyam bhagavantam prapya suggests that there is only one thing worthy of enjoyment, and that is the divine. But the divine is described here as Bhagavan. Bhagavan is, as we have seen before, in its root sense, the enjoyer. So, there's a very interesting play. The one thing worth enjoying is the divine enjoyer himself. What is he? He is himself the enjoyer. So if you think about it this way, there is nothing else in the whole universe which is the true enjoyment, the true blissfulness, except the one who is himself the bliss and the enjoyment. So you must get him first. And only when you get him, then you can enjoy him in all things, because that is the true enjoyment. In other words, there is no other true enjoyment except the enjoyment of the true enjoyer. There is no other enjoyment. And the mistake we make in life is to try to enjoy this thing, that experience, that relationship, that memory. They are not him. They are appearances of him in the play. They are in fact as appearances, the appearance which is as if not bliss. And that is what we are trying to catch. And yet in the first grasping or the first attempt to grasp, we did have a fragment, a brief flicker of his bliss. And therefore it felt as if we get the whole thing, we would get all of the bliss. And this is where the image which we played with earlier in the verses 8 are so important. Remember, there he described the whole manifestation of the form of the universe as the reflection of the sun playing on the surface of the waters. So as we gaze on the reflection in the waters, there is a flash of light, and our attention turns to that, and we feel as if by grasping the source of that light, we will get the source of the light itself. We feel as if turning to that flicker, we would be able to get the whole sun. But by the time we turn to it, the flicker is gone. And another thing flickers and pulls our attention. And if we pursue the sun through the flickering reflections, we will find ourselves jumping. Fleeting flickers attracting us at each moment, and we wander as if helplessly, aimlessly, randomly. Because each time we zero in on one point, the flickering there stops, and somewhere else there is the attraction. And this is the error we make in our sensory life experience. I ate this tasty food, it was delicious, and now I must have more and more of it until as if I could eat it all and somehow through it gain the bliss of the universe. And of course it doesn't happen. By the time you've had your second and third, the experience of enjoyment diminishes, fades out, or even reverses, and you have a stomach ache and you are repelled by the food now. But you could never get the wholeness of the bliss of the universe. In the first place, the attempt to grasp the form misses the enjoyer who is the true enjoyment, and he is concealed behind the form. So the first step required is find the true enjoyer who is the only true enjoyment. And he is behind all forms, within all forms. He is the very essence of all forms and all experiences and all forces and all things. So we do not have to look for him somewhere in abstraction. It is in and through forms that we will find him. Through our senses also. But the error is for the mind to stop on the appearance that we see. The mind must pursue the presence behind and its enjoyment behind the appearance, in each form. And then we begin to grasp him, and we experience, although it is not elaborated here, it is described in his commentary on the Isha Upanishad, we begin to see him in each form and enjoy him in all the forms, and we live in a wide equality. And the second step, we begin to find that all the forms are his expressions, his blissful expressions, and they are held in himself. And the third step, each form is an expression of his bliss and manifests his bliss. And then we begin to enjoy, at this third step, the true enjoyment in all things. And that's why he says, Sarva Vastushu, in all things we begin to enjoy the bliss. So in the Sanskrit, Ekam bhogyam bhagavantam prapya, having attained to the one enjoyer who is the enjoyment, bhungdvam sarva vastushu, enjoy yourself in all things. So in the translation, he puts it in this way, having attained the one enjoyable divine, enjoy him in all things. There is a very important elaboration of this in Sri Aurobindo's writing titled The Yoga and Its Objects. And I thought it worth reading from it for the elaboration of this. There are two passages which I want to read. The first one is from another article, and then we will come to the yoga and its objects. And the article in which there is a passing reference is an article titled The Principle of Evil, where he is discussing the problem of evil, and towards the end he discusses the problem of pain. And here he says, is pain real or a shadow? The Vedantist believes that the soul is a part of God or one with God himself and cannot feel pain or grief, but only ananda, bliss. The jiva or soul takes the rasa. Rasa literally means the juice. The jiva or soul takes the rasa, the delight of the dualities, and it changes to bliss in his nature. But this is veiled by the ignorance and separates the jiva in his swarupa, self form, from the mind and the heart. So this is what we had discussed earlier also. There is the veil separating the true enjoyer within, and surface is the ego complex with the mind and heart, which does not participate in the enjoyment. But through all the experiences of the surface being, behind the veil, the true enjoyer takes in the rasa, the sap of delight. And you will remember, the word always used in the text in Sanskrit is bhoga, which is not only enjoying, but it is also nourishment. And for the soul behind, as the psychic being, through all the experience of the surface personality, he draws nourishment and grows by taking in this sap of delight. What to the surface may be suffering or pain or joy, happiness or unhappiness in duality, is to the enjoyer within always the juice, the sap of delight, which is nourishing for his growth. And therefore, the psychic being can grow only when it experiences the world, and through experience only he grows. So, behind the veil is this jiva, And what is the role of pain? Where does it come from? Pain is a negative vikara, distortion or corruption of true experience in the mind. Pleasure, a positive vikara or distortion. So vikara is distortion, but pain is negative vikara and pleasure is positive vikara. Both are distortions. What is the truth? The truth is Ananda. So always it is Ananda which forms the universe, and everything is Ananda underlying. But to the surface experience of the personality on this front of the veil, you have pain and pleasure, positive distortion or negative distortion, but both are distortion. So how do we get to this blissfulness free of distortion? And here Sri Aurobindo says something very interesting. The truth is Ananda, but this is a knowledge for which mankind is not ready. Only the yogin realizes it and becomes sama, equal. Like-minded to pain and pleasure, good or evil, happiness or misfortune. So the yogin realizes it and therefore becomes equal to the oppositions of duality. But also the key idea here is, in order to get to that realization, you must establish equality. That he will tell us in the yoga and its objects. So, he, the yogi, he takes the rasa of both and they give him strength and bliss. For the veil between his mind and his soul is removed. And the apparent man in him has become one with the Swarupa, or real man. So the yogi is one in whom that veil has been removed, and so the mind and apparent personality of the surface is united with the true personality within, and therefore he is able to experience the rasa of both pain and pleasure, and they give him strength and bliss. So why can't everybody enjoy this? Why does he say that for this knowledge mankind is not ready? And he explains this briefly in 2 sentences and he leaves it at that. So we will just look at the thing he points to without elaboration. He says, if mankind as a whole came too early by that knowledge, the evolution of the perfect good would be delayed. The utter sweetness of daya and prema, pity and love, might never be extracted from the Leela. This is something very profound, and we will only touch upon it and not go too much into the elaboration. But the idea is this, that in the play, in the Leela, the divine is manifesting infinite possibilities. And certain facets or aspects of the divine need to be drawn out from the concealment in the play. In the ocean's waves and froth, there are many things hidden. The froth, the foam conceals many things, and we need as if to draw out those possibilities and potentialities. And the sweetness of pity and love also need to be drawn out, to be fully experienced. If all is experienced as part of the divine bliss, we would not perhaps dwell too much on these two, on pity and love, on daya and prema. For that, we need to experience this duality of suffering and happiness, pain and pleasure. It is only because we are able to experience these two opposing movements that we can enjoy this relationship of pity and love. And so if this knowledge of the freedom came too early in all of humanity, then the evolution of the perfect good would be delayed. And an aspect of the perfect good is this pity and love, and the utter sweetness of pity and love. You see, the pity is there in a superficial way. We see someone suffering, we have pity, because we have also suffered, we know what it is. But there is an utter sweetness of what may be called a divine pity, or a divine love which pours itself out when it sees another in suffering. In the Buddhist teaching, this is given great importance, and it is described as the divine metta. They don't use the word divine. Metta is derived from the Sanskrit maitri, but it is this pity and love aspect which is there. When the Buddha, about to become free and merge into the beyond, he turns around and gazes at the whole cosmos and the enormous suffering in the cosmos. And he experiences this embracing compassion where the whole cosmos is himself and all the suffering is his. And he upholds and bears that suffering. And because of that, he gives relief to the whole cosmos. And this is his special poise as the Amitabha Buddha. And he turns around to embrace the cosmos and liberate the cosmos. And it's as if it is said at that point, he promises that he will not leave until the whole universe is liberated. But at the same time, he can do this because he has attained to the liberation at the same time. And yet he turns around in this embracing gaze. And there is something very special in this, what may be called a divine pity and a divine love. The utter sweetness of daya and prema, pity and love, might never be extracted from the Leela. And therefore, all of humanity, all of mankind is not allowed to enter too early into this knowledge. So this is from the essay titled The Principle of Evil, which is on page 63 of volume 13 of the collected works. The next is in the Yoga and its Objects, where there is a larger elaboration of some of these things. Here he discusses the nature of the yogic effort, and he describes three processes. The first process of the yoga is to make the sankalpa of Atma Samarpana, the decision of self-surrender. And he says, put yourself with all your heart and all your strength into God's hands. Make no condition, ask for nothing, not even the siddhi in the yoga. For nothing at all except that in you and through you, His will may be directly performed. Those who, I will read the whole thing. To those who demand from Him, God gives what they demand. But to those who give themselves and demand nothing, He gives everything that they might otherwise have asked or needed. And in addition, He gives Himself and the spontaneous boons of His love. So the first process of the yoga is to make this decision of complete self-surrender to the divine, with no conditions, asking for nothing. Except that in you and through you, His will may be directly performed. That's the only thing you ask. The second step, the next process, is to stand aside and watch the working of the divine power in you. And then there are disturbances from that working, and you have to collaborate and cooperate and all that. So I will not read further. I'm just pointing out to this as steps because they're relevant to what we are reading. And now comes the third. The third process of the yoga is to perceive all things as God. First, as a rule, in the process of knowledge, one comes to see pervading all space and time one divine impersonal existence, Sad Atman, without movement, distinction or feature. Shantam Alakshanam, that is in silence, without features, in which all names and forms seem to stand with a very doubtful or a very minor reality. And he says one can easily see in this that one has the sense of a unreality and purposelessness and illusoriness and all that. It may seem, but afterwards, if you do not stop short and limit yourself by the impersonal realization, you will come to see the same Atman not only containing and supporting all created things, but informing and filling them. And eventually you will be able to understand that even the names and forms are Brahman. The flower is Brahman, the perfume is Brahman, the bee is Brahman, etc. You will then be able to live more and more in the knowledge which the Upanishads and the Gita hold up as the rule of life. You will see the self in all existing things, and all existing things in the self. And he quotes from the Isha Upanishad, Atmanam sarva bhuteshu sarva bhutani cha atmani. You will be aware of all things as Brahman. Sarvam khalu idam Brahma. But the crowning realization of this yoga is when you become aware of the whole world as the expression, play, or leela of an infinite divine personality. And this is what we are coming to in the text that we are reading. The crowning realization of this yoga is when you become aware of the whole world as the expression, play, or leela of an infinite divine personality. When you see in all not the impersonal Sad Atman, which is the basis of manifest existence, although you do not lose that knowledge, but Sri Krishna. What do you see? He says, Sri Krishna, who at once is, bases, and transcends all manifest and unmanifest existence. He is everything. He bases everything and he transcends everything. So in this experience, you see all things as Sri Krishna. And Krishna, you remember, we have seen the root sense. He is the one who draws all to himself by the power of attraction, blissfully. He is the Leelamaya. He is the one who is full of the play. He is also the Anandamaya. He is the all blissful. And so Sri Krishna here is the one all blissful, the divine all blissful, who is also the all playful. He is all things, and at the same time he bases all things, and at the same time he transcends all manifest and unmanifest existence. So this is the completeness of that experience. The crowning realization of this yoga is when you become aware of the whole world as the expression, play, or leela of an infinite divine personality. When you see in all Sri Krishna, who at once is, bases, and transcends all. There is a portion which I am skipping. It is he who has made this world out of his being and is immanent and sustains it as the infinite finite Ishvara, Ananta and Shanta, infinite and silent, Shiva and Narayana, Sri Krishna the Leelamaya, who draws all of us to him by his love, compels all of us by his masteries, and plays his eternal play of joy and strength and beauty in the manifold world. The world is only a play of his being, knowledge and delight. Sat, Chit, Ananda. Matter itself, you will one day realize, is not material, it is not substance, but form of consciousness, guna. Solidity itself is only a combination of the gunas, samhati and dhriti. Matter, life, mind, and what is beyond mind, it is all Sri Krishna, the Ananta Guna, infinite quality, the Ananta Guna Brahman, playing in the world as the Sat Chit Ananda. When we have this realization, when we dwell in it securely and permanently, all possibilities of grief and sin, fear, delusion, internal strife and pain are driven puissantly from our being. We realize in our experience the truth of the Upanishad. Anandam Brahmano Vidvan na vibheti kutaschana. He who possesses the delight of the Brahman has no fear from anything in the world. And similarly, he quotes from the Isha Upanishad, and I skip that. The whole world then appears to us in a changed aspect as an ocean of beauty, good, light, bliss, exultant movement on a basis of eternal strength and bliss. We see all things as Shubha, Shiva, Mangala, Anandamaya. We may translate as auspicious, pure, beautiful and blissful. We become one in soul with all beings, and having steadfastly this experience, are able by contact, by oneness, by the reaching out of love to communicate it to others, so that we become a center of the radiation of this divine state, Brahmi Sthiti, throughout the world, throughout our world. It is not only in things animate, but in things inanimate also that we must see Narayana, experience Shiva, throw our arms around Shakti. When our eyes that are now blinded by the idea of matter open to the supreme light, we shall find that nothing is inanimate, but all contains expressed or unexpressed, involved or evolved, secret or manifest, in the course of manifestation. Not only that state of involved consciousness which we call matter, but also life, mind, knowledge, bliss, divine force and being. In all things, the self-conscious personality of God broods and takes the delight of His gunas. Flowers, fruits, earth, trees, metals, all things have a joy in them of which you will become aware, because in all Sri Krishna dwells, pravishya, having entered into them, not materially or physically, because there is no such thing, but by Chit, the divine awareness in His transcendent being. So I missed one portion. Because there is no such thing, space and time being only conventions and arrangements of perception, the perspective in God's creative art. So the whole universe is as if created by God's creative art, in which there is only this Chit, the divine awareness in His transcendent being. So it goes on, but I will not read further. This is all part of the yoga and its objects, which you may enjoy reading also. But you see in this, the elaboration of what we have been reading in essence, in the Upanishadic style, in a very condensed form, briefly stated as simply, for Leela indeed the world is created, He has become playful for joy, therefore be engaged in Leela, O sons of bliss, being united, play, enjoy the bliss, having attained the one enjoyable divine, enjoy Him in all things. And the liberating knowledge by which one enjoys the play, in the self by self, am radiating self. Now with this, we come to the last verse, which we will only read now and then elaborate on next time. Translated, it goes like this: as commanded by the divine, I shall indeed expound the bliss. Let the bliss manifest itself, removing the obscurity. Radiate bliss, O sons of bliss. So it is as if He ordains us, commands us to radiate the bliss, O sons of bliss. And remember, in the text we just read, He describes how when we have this vision, we become a center of radiation for this bliss. So we will pause here for today, and we will elaborate on this last verse and also read from Sri Aurobindo of the nature of bliss next time we meet, which will be on the 8th of December for this series. In between, for 2 weeks, I will be out of station, and we will show some videos of earlier talks instead. For now, we will just read these last 3 verses and meditate on them. This indeed is liberation, The liberated one enjoys the enjoyments of all. Enjoying all joys infinitely, he is joined with finites. Enjoying finites, he is not reduced from infinite. He becomes one, he becomes many. Although unborn, he is still as if born. Even being born, he is not born, he is not bound. He has no birth. In the self, by self, am radiating self. By this knowing liberated, he plays. For Leela indeed is the world. He has become playful for joy. Therefore become engaged in Leela, O sons of bliss. Being united, play, enjoy the bliss. Having attained the one enjoyable divine, enjoy him in all things. As commanded by the divine blissful, I shall indeed expound the bliss. Let the bliss manifest itself, removing the obscurity. Radiate the bliss, O sons of bliss.